Well, I'm deeply honored to have been invited here. This is actually not only my first trip to Malaysia, but my first trip to Asia at all. So it's a new experience for me, and I forgot to turn on my camera. What I'm going to do is give you an overview of what the global monetary system is today, where it's going, and of course how we can fix it. But first, a question. What is the most important theme of the last 1,000 years of human history, of human development? In my opinion, it has been in the political realm, humankind's escape from serfdom through the development of self-governance. So what is serfdom? It's a lack of freedom. It's a lack of having much say over how our lives are conducted. It's a lack of being able to own property, the fruits of our labors on this earth. And property is absolutely key if we're going to develop a sustainable solution. And most importantly, the development of the rule of law as opposed to the law of the jungle. Also, freedom is always represented by a deconsolidation of power, moving from a situation where one person owns everything and makes all the rules through force of arms, to a situation where power is spread out and we all agree on a set of rules, either by voting on them directly or by electing people we trust to vote on the rules in the public interest. When everyone votes on all the rules, that's called democracy. When we elect people we trust to make the rules, it's called a republic or a commonwealth form of governance. By the way, a word on the background of my presentation. I'm a big supporter of the manned spaceflight program. I kind of grew up in that whole area. This is a picture I took almost 2 years ago. It's of the Space Shuttle Discovery, which you see on the far right, the orange cylinder, on pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center just before its last flight, before it was retired. That was the second to last flight of the Space Shuttle program. The anarchist view is essentially that humans are incapable of effective self-governance. So their solution is that true freedom can only be obtained by the abolition of governance. My view is that power abhors a vacuum. If we, the little people, don't move in to collectively form some sort of governance in the public interest, then there is one power out there that will inevitably seize power like a hungry wolf, and that is the money power. This is a binary decision. It's either one or the other. We either make government work for us or we are doomed to serfdom by the money power. In my first film, I called these folks the money masters. I couldn't think of a better name for it, and I still can't think of it. The money masters will always, always, always use their great wealth to control the political power with their money power. So, freedom is never just given to us in perpetuity. It has to be continually struggled for through the political process. Because there are only two basic alternatives, the rule of law or the rule of the jungle. Now, who in this room would voluntarily vote for their families to return to the law of the jungle? None of us. So that's my macro view of the course of human history. So now let's zoom in some on the details to see how we got here and how this macro view fits in. In English history, it all started with this guy. His name was King Henry I, the first Norman king of England, known as the Lion of Justice. He was the son of William the Conqueror. Henry was an interesting guy. He was the first English monarch to start this deconsolidation of power process that eventually led to serfdom being outlawed in England 500 years later, and the middle class starting to taste freedom. In 1100 AD, he wrote something called the Charter of Liberties, also known in English history as the Coronation Charter, because it was issued on the day Henry was crowned king. The Charter of Liberties was revolutionary. It was the founding document in English law and served as the forerunner for the Magna Carta, which was issued 215 years later, which was the forerunner of the U.S. Constitution. King Henry was smart enough to realize that the coronation charter would be worthless unless he broke the power of the money masters that they held over the most basic commodity, money, the medium of exchange. We all need to trade for things we need. So in Declaration number 5, there are only 14 declarations in the Charter of Liberties, and in number 5, King Henry forbid the most common form of usury of that day. It was called seigniorage. Seigniorage is the ability to make a profit on the issuance of money. This is, of course, what's behind. So what's behind the outlaw of seigniorage? Back in those days, the money masters were the goldsmiths. They were the ones who made gold jewelry out of gold. And so they were the ones who started minting gold coinage for cities, for counties, and even the king. So we all know the story about how the goldsmiths started giving out their paper receipts for gold in their vaults because it was more convenient to carry around than a heavy weight of gold coinage. Then the goldsmiths found out that they could lend out at interest more gold receipts than they actually had gold in their vaults. I think we all know this story. Because no one would ever check up on them. What they discovered was that on average, only about 10% of the people would ever come in and want to take physical possession of their gold. This was the beginning of fractional reserve lending, but it was really simply counterfeiting money. Well, of course, this is fraud. And so letting the goldsmiths decide how much money there is in society is a really silly way to run a monetary system. Under the goldsmith system, only 10% of the money was gold. 90% was just counterfeit paper receipts that the goldsmiths had the gall to not only send out to make and then spend into the economic system, but they actually lent it out and collect more Riba from the ignorant public. This Riba thing goes back a long way. In other words, 90% of the money in the system was actually Ribaized credit money. But if all that's not bad enough, it doesn't even stop there. There is an additional layer of injustice yet to this story. Once goldsmiths were the only ones controlling the amount of money in the system through their lending out of their phony gold receipts, they discovered that by working together, a group of goldsmiths could cause a depression merely by stopping the lending and calling in their previous loans. What would happen? Of course, this manufactured depression wouldn't bother the goldsmiths. They already had all the money they needed anyway, but it would hurt the commoners. And the lower down on the economic scale you were, the more it would hurt. So these money contractions hurt the vast majority, the peasants, the serfs, the most. And if things got bad enough, people would start to starve. Remember, the goldsmiths were completely capable of eliminating the depression merely by lending more money back into the economy. There's nothing automatic about depressions. Today, the money masters try to convince the public that depressions just happen. They say it's just part of the business cycle, an economic cycle so uncontrollable as the transits of Uranus in the heavens. I say there is no business cycle. In a debt money system where banks are in control over the vast majority of national money, all depressions, all recessions can be completely stopped dead in their tracks at any time merely by commercial banks lending out more money. There is no argument to this. It is the absolute secret fact of commercial banking. There is no business cycle. Of course, that would all change if we could get out of this debt money box. And that's why we're all here today. We all know it exists, we're just trying to figure out the best way to escape. Now let's leap forward 800 years to the J.P. Morgan era to see this at work. On March 11, 1891, a memorandum was circulated to bankers by the American Bankers Association, instructing bankers to create a depression on a certain date 3 years in the future. This was back when people were still fairly ignorant of what was going on, and so they could do this openly and circulate it in their own materials. Quote, on September 1st, 1894, we will not renew our loans under any consideration. On September 1st, we will demand our money. We will foreclose and become mortgagees in possession. We can take 2/3 of the farms west of the Mississippi and thousands of them east of the Mississippi as well at our own price. Then the farmers will become tenants, as in England. Stunning, but this was sent around to bankers. This was part of a congressional investigation. This wasn't a fantasy. This actually occurred. So yes, indeed, bankers, even in our day, still create depressions and bubbles and make money no matter which way their pendulum swings. But it still gets worse. Goldsmiths also discovered that by creating these depressions, they could exert a hidden yet powerful control over the king, the sovereign. Why? The average person would never figure out that it was the bankers behind the depression. The starving peasants would always blame the king. So the money masters discovered that they could usually make the king do what they wanted merely by threatening to crash the economy. Leaping forward another 829 years, on October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday in the United States, according to historian John Kenneth Galbraith, writing in The Great Crash, 1929, says that Bernard Baruch brought Winston Churchill into the visitors' gallery of the New York Stock Exchange to witness the panic that was about to ensue, to impress him with his power. Churchill was then the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent of the American Secretary of Treasury. So this was significant. Congressman Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Currency from 1920 to 1931, knew whom to blame the stock market crash on. He accused the Fed and the international bankers of orchestrating the crash. It was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all. That's pretty strong language for an American politician. So, back to King Henry. He finally saw through this ability of the goldsmiths to affect his political power by using their money power against him. The natural solution was, why the heck am I letting these thieves not only control me, but make a fortune doing it? So he decided to put a stop to it, or at least take back some of that power. How? By creating a complementary currency. This one issued by the government, the king. And what was this currency? This was the currency. They were called tally sticks. They were simple sticks of polished hazelwood with notches cut in them. You can see the notches. The notches were cut to a certain size to denote the amount. The king would split the stick lengthwise down the middle because hazelwood splits very easily. And he would keep one half, and the serf or the noble, as proof of payment, would keep the other. Well, since everyone had these receipts and everyone had to pay taxes, and these were made good for the payment of taxes, these receipts began to circulate as money. And it was the only form of money most serfs had. They were too poor to own gold. Gold has always been the money of the rich man, not the poor. The poor had no money other than the fruits of their labors. Things they could trade in the market, milk, eggs, vegetables, handmade items. But it wasn't money. You had to go trade, and it was difficult to make change if all you had to trade was a cow. That was a laugh line. It didn't work, okay. So, tally sticks worked well and instantly became popular. Now, after I released The Money Masters in 1996, some American gold bugs proponents of gold-backed money only, circulated the story that tally sticks were just receipts used for huge real estate transactions. Of course, that was ironic based on the fact that the first tally stick ever filmed was filmed by me inside the Bank of England Museum, and it just happened to be one of the biggest they had saved from destruction, one that represented a 25,000 British pound real estate deal. Of course, none of these so-called gold bug experts ever bothered to actually go to the Bank of England Museum and actually ask one of their experts about any of their gold bug theories. No, they were satisfied to just issue their opinions from afar with zero basic facts. So when I created my second film, The Secret of Oz, I was determined to go back to the Bank of England and ask its head curator this exact question: were tally sticks only used as a medium of exchange for large purchases? Unfortunately, I could not find the video asset to play you the clip of this gentleman, but suffice it to say that he is the world's greatest authority on tally sticks, and he confirmed that thousands of pocket-sized tallies were manufactured and they were used as a common currency. It was a completely debt-free, government-issued money, based on nothing, worked great for 720 years, turned a small island with virtually zero resources into the greatest power on the seas. And in fact, they colonized this country. So now, what were the gold bugs to do? Well, unfazed, they began attacking me as a lover of fiat money. Because in the gold bug belief system, only gold can serve as money. And here is the friend of all gold bugs, Ron Paul. Whoops. That's not how it works. Here we go.
I don't like the idea that they have monopoly control. It's a cartel. They get to print the money. And the Constitution really doesn't give them that authority. The Constitution said that only gold and silver can be legal tender.
The Constitution says that only gold and silver can be legal tender. That is completely wrong. Dr. Paul knows it's wrong. I care not to speculate why he continues to repeat this distortion, but it is a clear distortion, and anyone with the slightest knowledge of the U.S. Constitution knows it is wrong. And so here is the basic philosophical reason gold cannot be the only form of a nation's money. That is, if your goal is to provide a decentralized governance in the public interest. Gold is concentrated money. It is the ultimate over-centralization. Gold bugs hate it when I point this out, but here's a letter written by J.P. Morgan to his brother in 1885. As a man of sense, I am a gold bug and support a gold bug government and a gold bug society. As a man of the world, I like confusion, anarchy, and war. A stunning quote from the head of what was known as the robber barons of the early 1900s. I hope you all will think about that when you consider supporting a gold-only money system. So, if I can accomplish just one thing by my visit here in beautiful KL, it would be to hammer home this point that gold cannot serve as the primary form of money if you are interested in a governance in the public interest. If you're interested in a governance where power is maximally diffused. If you're interested in a very steep power pyramid with very few people having power, gold is great. It serves their interests great. It does not serve the public interest. It can never, has never served the public interest. It can never serve the interest of the Commonwealth. It always, always, always serves the interest of the money masters, those who would seize back this 1,000-year outbreak of human freedom. This is not a message many of you probably want to hear, but I was brought here and I'm giving my message. Now, I just want to say that gold and silver coin have an important place in a money system as a complementary currency. That's why I was the only monetary reformer to sign on to the Utah Legal Tender Act. This was the first of its kind in the United States when it was passed last year. It allows gold and silver coinage issued by the U.S. government to be legal tender in the state of Utah. Now, our next speaker will tell us that a single state will make a difference, and he's right. But the Utah law is still an important step for the United States and other states, at least to recognize that there is a problem and do something about it. I have no problem with this. Monetary reformers should not fear gold and silver coin. Complementary currencies serve to keep the debt-free, government-issued paper money honest. In a rightly configured, debt-free, government-issued money, greenbacks or U.S. notes, in the United States Federal Reserve notes, which are a Riba-based currency, have the green seal. This actually was issued by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. It has the red seal. It was issued completely without debt. The only difference is the red seal, and across the top it says U.S. note, United States note, instead of Federal Reserve note. These notes have a zero cost of use. Any trading of physical commodities, such as gold and silver, have a cost of use and a certain amount of illiquidity. Therefore, commodity money can never compete when placed on an even footing with debt-free, government-issued money. A gold-only money system has never served the cause of freedom. Freedom for the common people of any nation at any time in history. It does bring freedom, but only for the top 1%. Here is what we can all agree on. A gold-only money system can cause monetary stability, but it can also be manipulated, and history has shown that. Just as it was in King Henry's time, to ensure the ability to create instability. I have an axiom. Others have branded it Still's axiom. It matters not what backs the money. All that matters is who controls the quantity. It doesn't matter if your money is backed by gold or silver. All that matters is who is in control of the quantity. Do you think that you, me, the common person, would be in control of the quantity in a gold-only money system? It's never happened before in history. Why would it start now? You see, the vast majority of us want economic stability. In fact, that's what the so-called science of economics is supposed to be all about, to create a stable platform for all of us to be able to use fairly and equally, one which is created in the public interest. But has that been the case in the last 100 years? No. The privately owned central bank system, the Riba system, has virtually taken over the world and has done nothing but run up all kinds of debt, creating a constant churning of the economy with booms, bubbles, busts, and crashes. We, the people, never make out from these instabilities, but someone does. For every loser, there is a winner somewhere. So yes, gold-only money systems can create stability if the owners of gold want stability. An example of this is the post-Civil War period in America, where we saw periods of spectacular economic expansion, punctuated by severe, deliberate contractions in the money supply under a gold-only money system. Why? So that the money masters could milk the American economy for their benefit. Remember, stability benefits all citizens equally. Instability benefits only the money masters. But does a gold money system... Yeah, you can clap because I need to drink of water. But does a gold-only money system create stability automatically? Definitely not. History has shown this. America was on a gold-only money system during the crash that led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. That didn't do a darn thing for us, which incidentally was a worldwide event. Gold money did nothing, zero, to prevent the money masters from manipulating the quantity of money that caused the crash and the almost decade-long depression of the 1930s. The Federal Reserve System has admitted this. During the early 1930s, the Federal Reserve, then less than 20 years old, it was started in 1913. It was only 20 years old, and it couldn't stop this. And it was specifically tasked in its charter to create conditions of monetary stability and full employment. However, it deliberately contracted the American money supply by 33%, despite the fact we were on a gold-backed money system, thereby turning a natural bursting of the monetary bubble created during the 1920s, which was known as the Roaring Twenties in America. It turned it into a full-blown, long-duration deflationary depression. In 1963, Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman analyzed it this way. The drastic decline in the stock of money and the occurrence of a banking panic of unprecedented severity did not reflect the absence of power on the part of the Federal Reserve System to prevent them. In retrospect, the contraction could almost certainly have been prevented and the stock of money kept from declining or indeed increased to any desired extent. In other words, the Fed could have stopped the depression. They chose not to. And yet history in the United States completely ignores this fact. On the occasion of Milton Friedman's 90th birthday on November 8, 2002, Ben Bernanke, then only a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, he'd not yet ascended to the chairmanship, admitted this deliberate contraction during his speech commemorating Friedman's birthday. I would like to say to Milton and Anna was his co-author, Anna Schwartz, regarding the Great Depression, you're right, we did it. We're very sorry, but thanks to you, we won't do it again. A stunning admission. Well, surprise, surprise, it has happened again. I actually had an interaction with Professor Friedman while he was a professor at Stanford University. When we were editing my first film on the economy in 1996, The Money Masters, I decided that I really should have a professor of economics take a look at it to be sure I had not made any significant mistakes. I've been a reporter all my life, so I know how to get in touch with university professors for comments. So I dialed up the Stanford University press office and told them I had a documentary on economics and needed a comment from Professor Friedman. The next day, ring, ring. On the phone, it was Milton Friedman. Then he was 84 at that point. He graciously gave me his home address, and I overnighted him the first cut of the film so he could look at it over the weekend. Monday morning, ring, ring. It's Milton Friedman back on the phone. I'll never forget his first words. Boy, if you kill the Fed and don't kill fractional reserve lending, you've done nothing. That we had to completely redo the edit of The Money Masters because I just had not that was such a profound statement wrapped up in a single sentence. It's not the Fed. If you killed the Fed tomorrow, nothing would change. The Fed is just like the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. It's to make us think that the government is doing something. It's to make us think that the Fed is actually part of the government, operating in the interest of we the people. But I got news for you. The Fed is a wholly owned creature of the banks. All of the stock of the Fed is owned by the commercial banks. Who do you think they're beholden to? Do you think they're going to operate in our public interest, or do you think they're going to operate in the bank's interest? Friedman, of course, understood the problem much more deeply than I ever will. He explained that it wasn't the Fed that was the problem. It was the money creation power of the commercial banks. He told me to put more emphasis on stabilizing the quantity of money, and I've done that ever since. His preferred method was to have the amount of money tied to population growth, but he also mentioned if there was some way to tie it to GDP, he'd be fine with that as well. He then provided me with a supportive quote, which we use on the Money Masters website, and this is it. Quote, as you know, I'm entirely sympathetic with the objectives of your Monetary Reform Act. You deserve a great deal of credit for carrying through so thoroughly on your own conception. Best wishes, Milton Friedman. So let's take a quick look at American history to clean things up. If I were to go out onto the streets of the United States and ask the average person who creates the money, they'd look at me wondering if it was a trick question, but eventually they'd finally say, well, the government does, don't they? Well, why do they say that? because they know intuitively that is government's most profound and important responsibility, to create the national money and control its quantity. That's the most important responsibility. However, the message we get from the experts in the United States now is completely controlled. The media, the politicians, and the professors of economics. And I'll go into a little bit of that in just a minute. But that notion would also be reinforced by their common sense. Everybody knows that the most important responsibility of government is to create the nation's money and to regulate its value. In the United States, it's right there in the U.S. Constitution. When America established its sovereignty from England in 1776, we, the people, took charge of all governmental power and decided that we would restructure a government that would serve the public interest instead of the banking interest, as had been the case in England with the formation of the Bank of England since 1694. So let's take a brief look at America's two most important founding documents. The Declaration of Independence. When America first declared itself independent of England, we issued a Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. The Declaration outlines the notion that in order for a government to be stable and enduring or sustainable, it must be widely considered to be fair or just. In other words, a government must be supported by something known as the consent of the governed. This is how it starts off. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The use of this last word, happiness, was something new, actually, to America. Though Americans don't realize it, using the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was actually a radical departure from the more traditional American phrase, life, liberty, and property. And the concept of property is an essential ingredient to freedom. In 1765, 11 years before the Declaration of Independence, the battle cry of those who opposed the Stamp Act was liberty, property, and no stamps. In 1774, the first resolution of the Declaration of Resolves of the First Continental Congress was that the colonies are entitled to life, liberty, and property. This was just 2 years before the Declaration of Independence was written. So this is an important footnote to the American Declaration of Independence, which the vast majority of Americans are not aware of. But if we are going to rightly repurpose government away from a plutocracy ruled by the rich, and back towards serving the public interest, we have to be aware that the concept of protecting personal property must be part of that equation. The second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence deals with the consent of the governed. Quote, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Close quote. And now comes the basic justification for the revolution. Quote, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Close quote. So the Declaration of 1776 was the revolutionary document that began the great American political experiment. The unanswered question was, were average citizens capable of self-governance? Well, the first thing Americans tried when forming a government after the Revolution was something called the Articles of Confederation. The various states didn't want to give up any power, and so they made the federal government so weak it couldn't even collect taxes. So 11 years later, Americans took their experiment in for a refitting, and in 1787 they came up with, after furious debates and compromises, something called the U.S. Constitution. The federal Congress was given more power, but not much more. Congress was only given certain and very carefully defined powers. All other powers were to go to individual state governments or were to be retained by we the people. In other words, they made every effort to decentralize the power. So here's Article 1, Section 8. It's known as the enumerated powers section. These are the only powers we the people granted to Congress. Incredibly, it's only 430 words long, remarkably short. But these are the three interesting sections of the enumerated powers when you're coming to talk about monetary reform. The Congress shall have the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. This was Jefferson's main complaint about the Constitution, and he was right. And here's why. If a nation could never borrow, then there would never be an overspending problem. Why? Because if the government spent more than their income, they would have to suffer the wrath of the voting electorate immediately. Why? Because they would have to raise taxes on those people immediately. So borrowing drives this overspending problem. And if you only ended the ability of your national governments to borrow money, and they borrow the money primarily from who? Banks. It eliminates 80% of the problem right there. Government borrowing allows and even encourages the politicians to overspend. In fact, as long as governments continue to be allowed to borrow, it is virtually impossible for them ever to balance a budget in the future. This talk that you hear in American political circles, oh, if we just endure this austerity, eventually we're going to start paying down the national debt, is nonsense. Paying down the national debt in a debt money system means extinguishing money. We've already got enough problems without having less money. We need more money. That's why austerity will never work. Furthermore, government borrowing sets off another problem. Remember what Proverbs tells us. The borrower is servant to the lender. Why is that? Because who are the primary lenders of government debt? National debt. Big banks and central banks, foreign and domestic. Now let's look at the famous Clause 5, the money clause, where it says to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Now here's where Dr. Paul and I disagree, and we're going to play this clip once again. Okay. That just throws me off. Anyway, you remember the Dr. Paul clip. So first of all, if gold money automatically regulates the value of money like Ron Paul believes, if the Constitution meant metal coin by using the verb form of the word coin, then why in the heck would you need to regulate the value thereof? What Ron Paul deliberately is confusing people about is about the wording of Article 1, Section 10, where it says that no state can coin money, emit bills of credit, or make anything but gold and silver coin a tender of payments. Again, this is in Section 10, the section that deals with the responsibility of the states, not the Congress. The post-war period saw a rash of wild money printing by hundreds of small state banks, and this has nothing to do with the federal government's responsibility. Ron Paul knows this, and yet continues to say it. Okay, I'm going to have to jump ahead here because I'm running out of time. So we're going to jump up to usury. So this brings me to the topic of usury. Now I have to admit that this is a completely new topic for me, and I've struggled against the concept for years. I used to believe that because of the time value of money, if there was no interest, there would be no lending. Even when Ellen would say to me, but the interest is never created, I'd still justify it by thinking a rightly conceived economy would just grow to such an extent that the interest wouldn't be a problem. Well, I was wrong. Recently, a friend of mine by the name of Dr. Anthony Santelli, founder of AES Capital in Cleveland, helped me to understand this. If you had borrowed $1 at the time of Christ 2,000 years ago at 6% interest compounded, how much money would you owe today? It would be 4.09 times 10 to the 50th. For comparison, the entire worth of everything on earth today would only amount to 2.5 times 10 to the 14th. Obviously, this would be an impossible contract, and therefore enforcement would be immoral, for it cannot be moral to ask someone to do the impossible. And in fact, the church has always taught, the Christian church has always taught, that lenders should even make restitution for usurious gains they have acquired. Yes, all unjust interest and fees should be returned to the borrowers who are forced to pay them according to papal encyclicals. Lender fees. However, lender fees that make the lender whole can be charged. These include fees that cover the cost of originating the loan, including payment for the lender's time and costs. It's important to note, however, that origination fees are a one-time charge, not interest. Equities, royalties, and rents. Money can be legitimately invested in equities, royalties, and rental properties and can earn profits. Lost opportunity cost. Interest charged to cover a loss of opportunity is not allowed by the church. Just because you could have earned a 5% rate of return elsewhere does not mean you can demand a 5% interest rate. If the opportunity looks so good, you should have taken it. For further details, you can contact Dr. Santelli, and here's his website. So that's the Christian take on usury. No interest is moral. Okay, now this is very important. I hope they allow me to finish this. Why doesn't the general public know what I've been telling you? The media is so mortgaged out to the max from the bankers. Without having their loans rolled over periodically, they would be out of business in a week. They can't even pay the interest, much less the staggering principal on these loans that have accumulated. I know this from first-hand testimony of friends in the industry that J.P. Morgan calls the shots at the big three television networks. So, the media isn't telling us the truth. What else is there? The politicians won't tell us the truth. They depend on the banks and Wall Street firms for the biggest campaign donations. So what's the next one? Professors of economics. Professors of economics won't tell us the truth. Robert Auerbach, a former investigator with the House Banking Committee, found out that there are only 1,000 to 1,500 monetary economists working in the U.S. today. But guess what? This is his quote. Add up the 220 economist jobs at the Board of Governors of the Fed, along with regional bank hires and contracted economists, and the Fed employs or contracts with easily 500 economists at any given time. Add in those who have previously worked for the Fed or who hope one day to work for the Fed, and you've amounted to a very significant majority of the field. According to Joshua Rosner, a Wall Street analyst who correctly called the 2008 meltdown, the Fed has a lock on the economics world. There is no room for other views. The only way you can actually get in a journal is by subscribing to the views of one of the journals. So what's the solution? Obviously, the normal information pathways have been blocked by the banks and the Fed, the media, the politicians, and the professors. So the only path left to us is to go to the alternative media and directly to the people through the internet. But the remedy is actually really simple and easy for the average person to grasp, and I can finish it in 1 minute. Every nation needs to do three things. Number one, forbid national borrowing. Sovereign nations do not have to borrow. The borrower becomes the servant to the lender. And in the case of nations, the lenders are mostly the biggest banks. Number two, all nations need to issue the debt-free sovereign currency again and put an end to consolidated currencies like the euro. The argument against this is that it will cause hyperinflation. My answer, not if you control the quantity. If controlling the quantity is the only thing we have to do to get out of this mess, don't you think we can find a handful of honest people here in this room who will do it? Here's my axiom again. It matters not what backs the money. All that matters is who controls the quantity. Another argument is that government is too corrupt to control the quantity. My response is, government is all we have. You can't elect a banker. Those are your only two choices.